Good evening, everyone. And tonight we are still not abandoning Enoch. We are going to go back to Enoch, but what we're going to do tonight is actually trace a very popular story called the story of the Watchers. And we've mentioned them, of course, before, but we're going to trace it from what it's based on, which is Breshit Vav, Genesis 6. We're going to start from there, and we're going to trace it through Enoch, through the book of the Watchers in Enoch. We're not going to look, because we already went through a lot of Enoch and we saw different places where they showed up. We're not going to look at every single section of Enoch. We're going to look at the book of the Watchers, and then we're going to look at Jubilees and how Jubilees takes that myth and develops it further. And the reason we're going to be looking at this story in particular is because it's so popular in Second Temple texts as an explanation of sin. It's almost a given in certain texts, and before the end of this series that we have, before the end of this mini series that we're going to be doing within our larger biblical interpretation in the Second Temple period class, we're going to get to the Qumran texts, which are simply assuming that you know this story, and it can just say the bastards. And it's clear that it means the bastard spirits, which are the spirits that result from the Watchers' illicit union with human women. And we're going to get to that. So we're starting with the actual biblical story, and then we're going to move on. Now, before I do that, though, I would like to address some questions that came up in the last class, and I feel that I didn't address completely or properly. So one of those is where the name Metatron came from, because I think I gave kind of a too facile answer to that. And I do want to say that if you watch the recording from the last class, I actually cut out my explanation because it was too simple and too glib, and I want to kind of go into it a little bit more now. And also a little bit about kind of the Lucifer story, because it came up and it's going to come up more like just in our minds. And I want to say a little something about that, not go into completely the history of it, because that's a whole course in itself, but I do want to address it a little bit more. Okay. So first of all, Metatron. So it is true, we don't really know where the name is from. Here are some possibilities. For those of you who are interested in looking at where there's a very good kind of collection of the opinions in Andrei Orlov's book, The Enoch Metatron Tradition. So if you want, and that's really what I'm drawing from, because he does a nice job of kind of collecting numerous different opinions there. So just to give you, so we have some who say, and I actually, this doesn't really resonate with me, that Metatron is from Matra Mem Tet Resh Aleph. In other words, kind of, which would itself have to be from the root Nun Tet Resh, to guard or to protect. In other words, a garter. We could say, well, if angels are the watchers, then Metatron is the garter. I think it's a bit of a stretch, but it is in Jastro, among other things, and there are others. And this is what I talked about last time, was from the two Greek words meta and thronos, right? Which would be one who serves behind the throne, or one who occupies the throne next to the throne of glory, which would be God's throne. Gershom Shalom, of course, doesn't like that idea. I shouldn't say of course, he doesn't like that idea, because we don't have any word like that in Greek. So why would they create a Greek phrase that doesn't exist? Okay, so then another possibility from Greek would be that's been proposed, but is almost certainly not correct, would be from a synthronos, which would be like someone who's sitting on the throne, but that's ridiculous, because Metatron, first of all, is never described as sitting actually on God's throne with God. That doesn't happen. So that doesn't really make sense. But Saul Lieberman proposed this as an option. Some think that it's from the Persian god Mithras. Metatron, Mithras, saying that they have similar celestial functions. And again, here I'm really looking at Andrei Orlov's book here. He's citing Odeberg really. It's a little, again, it's a bit of a stretch because even though Mithras has some of the same names, has some of the same kind of functions, that's not what you would automatically say about Mithras. Or there's the Latin Metator, which would be a measurer. This is, to me, even further from a possibility. Even though Ramban and Elazar of Worms propose this, because you would say Metator, so that in Hebrew it would be Metator or Metitor. I don't know why. I guess if you could say it was a guide or a messenger, maybe. He doesn't seem to have much of a measuring function. Or metron, also from the Greek, would also be a measure. Others have just proposed that it just means it's just a nonsense name. You have other nonsense magical names in the Hechalot traditions, like Adiriron or Daptapiron. And finally, well, this is a real stretch. Could Metatron have tetra in the name because he's supposed to be carrying the name of God? So the tetragrammaton, so he's got tetra in his name. It's just, you can hear that all of these are kind of a stretch. So we don't have any real answer, any one definitive answer of where this name came from. So sorry to not give a definitive answer, but I want to be a little bit more complete in the way I addressed it than before. Lucifer. So the idea that the devil is an angel that has fallen. Put the name Lucifer aside, okay? So the idea that the devil is an angel that has fallen is very prominent. It doesn't just originate from him. It's very prominent in St. Augustine, right? So St. Augustine has this idea very prominently that the devil is an angel that fell, okay? And I'm going to leave it there because there are whole discussions and also, when did he fall? Okay. In terms of the name Lucifer, he doesn't use the name Lucifer. And frankly, it's not that important from a theological standpoint. At least I think it's not that important from a theological standpoint if he's named Lucifer or not, except that we like calling him Lucifer because of the later literary kind of buildup of Lucifer. The idea that the head of the demon, the devil, Satan, is actually an angel that fell, as opposed to a member of the heavenly court who's fulfilling a function, which is what Satan is in Judaism. And Satan is that in Judaism from the biblical books, right? From Eo, from Job. Satan is a functionary who you can have issues with, but does a job, right? He's got a job and he does his job. Right? We may not be happy with it, but that's what he's doing. Now in Christianity, he's an angel who rebelled. That idea is certainly prominently in St. Augustine. So that's already pretty early on. Augustine's whole date is 354 to 430 of the Common Era. And if we talk about where does the name Lucifer come from, and also some connect. So Lucifer, if I'm going to share my screen now. Oops, this is under Orlov. Okay. So here in Yeshayahu, Yudal, let's put this in. Yeshayahu, Yud Dalid, Yud Bet to Yud Dalid. So that's Isaiah 14:12 to 14, right? Ech nafalta mishamayim Helel ben Shachar nigdata la'aretz cholesh al goyim. How have you fallen, O shining one, son of dawn? This seems to be this. On the one hand, it's really referring. If we go back to the beginning of this chapter, we're talking about the the idea of the kings of nations, right? The kings of nations have been brought down, and this is how you fallen from heaven, O shining one, son of dawn, Hillel ben Shachar. It seems to be a reference to the morning star, right? As it's kind of metaphorical morning star, right? So, and then it says, once you thought in your heart, I will climb to the sky higher than the stars of God. I will set my throne. This is translated relatively early on as Lucifer. Just the name, it's just given like in the Vulgate, Lucifer, right? Hillel ben Shachar would be Lucifer. So, and then because in Luke, we have in 10:18, it says, he replied, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. The combination of these two, right? The idea that Satan is a devil that fell, right? And this reference to a falling star, that's translated as Lucifer, that's where you get the Lucifer, the name Lucifer connection. There are also traditions in general regarding the morning star, because the morning star goes through cycles, that this idea of a star that then falls, right? A bright star that you can't always see, right? So is in the ancient world also had this kind of, was behind these ideas of celestial beings that could fall. But let's get away from there, because that's a whole different topic. And I see looks of confusion that I'm not really going to be able to help you get out of now, because this is not, it's not my thing. I still remember listening to Paradise Lost. I thought the whole explanation of, wait, if God knew that Lucifer was going to sin, then why did he let him sin? I thought it was very cute the way he did it. But I'm not going to go into that now. So if we're getting away from the literary aspect, there is this idea, but relatively early on in Christianity, that Satan is an angel that fell, as opposed to the idea that Satan is an angel doing his job. Okay, so let's get back to our main topic, which is looking at the beginning of the story of the Watchers in Bereshit, in Genesis. If you look at your screens, you will see Genesis 6. Everyone can see Bereshit Vav, Genesis 6 on their screens? Yes? Okay, good. All right, so this is just to remind you where we're at, okay? Noah has been born, all right? But we're not at the flood, okay? Noah has been born, he has 3 sons, and now we read this story. Okay, when humankind started to increase over the earth, they had daughters. Right? They saw that the women were good, right? What does good mean? One assumes pretty, okay? Maybe I'm being sexist, but it's general, they're women, so it's that's probably what it means. And they took women from whomever they chose.
But Miriam, you have many times tovat mar'eh, tovat yofi, yefat mar'eh. Why should you use tovat as a beautiful?
I think because it's already seeing them by your I mean, yeah, it absolutely could say that. It could be that it's implying that there's more to it because they're humans, right? Because they're not, I mean, angels are coming and they see that the women are good. Maybe there is more that's implied here, like more than beauty, and it has something to do with their humanity, right? It does say that they see them, that they're good, right? But sure, it could be that they're worthwhile. Whatever it is, there's something they want in these women, right? And they take women from whomever they chose.
No, but how about if you compare to Vayar Elohim Kitov? Like he also saw, and it saw that it's good.
That's
it could be.
Sure, and it's humankind that's and you can say, well, humankind is good, right? God sees, like, in other words, is it something in your humanity that's good, right? That the angels like, right? Could be, sure.
Maybe.
Vayomer Adonai lo yadon ruchi badam laolam b'shagam hu basar vayu yamav 120 shana. And God said, my spirit will not reside in people forever. Now, the words Yadon, Yadon has been under a lot of discussion. Shagam here also under a lot of discussion in terms of what exactly it means. These are unusual words. Yadon is probably from the Akkadian Nadanu, but it probably means to dwell or to reside. In my spirit will not reside in people forever, since it is also flesh, and its days shall be 120 years. There are a lot of problems with this particular verse. First of all, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with what we're talking about, right? We've got angels coming, mating with human women, and all of a sudden God's saying, you know what? People aren't going to live more than 120 years. And the other problem is that right after this, people are living way more than 120 years, right? I mean, like, so it's those are two issues with this particular verse. We're going to come back to this later in just a little bit. Hanifilim hayu ba'aretz bayamim hahem. V'gam acharechem asher yavo bnei elohim el bnot hadam v'yaldu lahem hem hagiborim asher me'olam anshe Hashem. Okay. This is when the Nephilim were on the earth on those days, and also afterwards. That the divine beings is a good translation here, because Bnei Elohim, I'm going to say a little bit about Banim here. Banim doesn't really mean sons. It means members of a class of, right? Bnei Elohim here means members of the divine class. Okay, they're divine beings. Okay, so these divine beings came to the women. Now, if you're really being very specific about this verse, it doesn't even say that their children were Nephilim. It says Nephilim existed on earth in those days, and also afterwards. Okay, but the implication is that somehow the Nephilim are the result of this mating. Right, that's it's easy to read that into it, and I also think that it really does imply that. They are the heroes, the strong men that were from days of old, as it were, men of renown. What is it saying here? It seems to be saying, you've heard of these heroes. Right. I'm going to put in a little bit of my own interpretation here, but it's not just my own interpretation. You've heard of these heroes, of these people, like, for example, who in some mythologies are considered demigods. Yeah, there were these men of incredible abilities in the old days, right? They came out of some kind of weird union, right? I'm explaining, but what, and this was where we come back to this verse, but they're people. So that's what it seems, if we look at the way these verses are combined, all right? These men of renown, Anshe Hashem, there may be something divine in them, okay? But they didn't live forever. God said they're only going to live 120 years. God said people live 120 years, and these are people, right? My spirit is not going to dwell on people forever. They don't live forever, okay? And these guys, these men of renown, are in that class, all right? That is, if we just take this story on its own, what does it seem to be doing? It seems to be in conversation with other things the audience has heard, right, about men of renown. And it's telling you these guys did not live forever. They weren't gods. Once they're on earth, once they're people, they don't live more than 120 years. Okay, now again, it's in the context of Breshit, of Genesis, where people do live more than 120 years, so it's kind of problematic. But this is a way of kind of seeing that story just on its own. Now, who are the Nephilim? Okay, so we read in Bamidbar, in Numbers, and give me just a moment here. Okay, let me actually pull that up for you.
Miriam, while you're looking, the general explanation that I know to Vayamav 120 Shana is that he will have 120 years until the Mabul.
Yes, which is fine. And that's it. You can say that, all right. And then that, but it doesn't quite work. And let me just hear. So for example, Noah lives to over 600 years, right? So why hasn't he died already? You say, well, okay, well, that's before you can say, well, that's before the flood, I guess. But it's a little, it's right after that story. In other words, it doesn't say after the flood. And then you have Noah living till a ridiculous age, right? So that's he lives to 950 years.
No. I'm saying that in 120 years, the Mabul will come.
Oh,
now,
yes, and that is read. It is absolutely read that way. It absolutely is read that way. Yes. Sorry. Sure. I misunderstood. Yes. That is one of the ways it's read. All right. So yes, absolutely, and that is absolutely a way that it's read. That that what it's saying is that in 120 years there will be a flood. Okay, and that takes us back to how Jews in the Second Temple period read this text. They read it as connected to the flood. They did not read it the way I just read it, where let's look at the story on its own. They read it quite clearly and obviously and frankly correctly, because they're reading it in context. They read it as talking about the what caused the flood, right? So if you look, let's go back to our text in Breshit. So right after this, we have the Nephilim, and right after this, Vayar Adonai ki rabba ra'at ha'adam ba'aretz v'chol yetzer machshavot libo rak kol hayom. Right? God sees how great, how wicked people are. Right? Everything they're thinking about, every plan of theirs is just evil all day. God regrets having made mankind, and he says, okay, I'm gonna kill them all. I'm gonna have a flood. This is right after this story, right after the story of Bnei Elohim Uvnot Adam, of the divine beings and human women. Right after that story, you have this you have the flood. So naturally, Jews reading the story or hearing the story, they're like, okay, this caused the flood, or this was directly connected to the flood. Okay, so let's just take a look quickly to see the Nephilim. I want to point out here that this is something I think we always remember it as, oh, here the Nephilim are giants. Here the Nephilim are not particularly described as giants. The way we know, quote unquote, the Nephilim are giants is because of Bamidbar Yud Gimel Lamed Bet. I'm not actually Lamed Gimel. Numbers 13:33. Okay, they're talking about the Meraglim, the spies that are sent ahead to scout out the land, and they say, "V'shem ra'inu et hanephilim bnei anak min hanephilim." There we saw, the Nephilim, who were the bnei anak. We read them as the giants, who were from the Nephilim, and we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, and so we looked to them because they were so huge, right? And then we have some idea of Rephaim, but the idea is that the Nephilim are giants, but we get the fact that Nephilim are giants, the fact, quote unquote, that Nephilim are giants, from this verse and not from the original passage in Bereshit. So let's take a look at how this passage is interpreted in terms of, and there are, even in the interpretation of this as this, what we end up calling it the sin of the watchers, there's an interpretation that connects it to the flood, and there's an interpretation that connects it, let's say, less to the flood, that it's its own contained story. I'm going to pause here for questions. Any questions before I continue? Okay. All right. So,
yes, I have a question.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Could it be that instead of divine beings, there was something else that was going on?
Oh, yeah, because of course there are numerous interpretations that see them not as divine beings. Of course, the traditional interpretation that we're all used to is that Bnei Elohim here, Elohim are judges, right? There's another interpretation that was more popular in Christian interpretation, that this is talking about the descendants of Cain and the descendants of Seth, of Shet, Cain and Shet, intermarrying. That's something that's also reflected by Rihal in the Kuzari, if you want to see it in Jewish tradition.
What about bestiality?
How would it be bestiality?
Well, there's a reason. There's a reason for the destruction.
Okay, so we don't have to go that far. Like, this is the thing. So it's hard to read this. It's hard to read this as bestiality, because if you're reading the verses, it's talking about divine beings. So you have to have something you can translate divine beings into. Divine beings are not beasts. Divine beings are, on the contrary, they're a higher level. If you can't say they're human beings because they're mating with human women explicitly. So you still have to remain at least somewhat tied to the verse, right? You can't just say, I've decided. Well, you can, right? There are verses that has been done with, where you just say, okay, you know, we're kind of gonna look at this a different way, but not with this verse. With this verse, it's hard to call this bestiality. Now, Moshe Matityahu also points out that the 120 years can be, and I think I addressed this earlier, that the 120 years could be referring to from this point onward. Anyone born from this point onward is only going to have a lifespan of 120 or less. So either of those could work. It certainly seems like it's meant to be within a reasonable limit, the 120.
Miriam?
Yes.
To be more precise about what I'm suggesting, there are people born afterwards that live longer.
Yeah.
Like Avraham, for example.
Yaakov.
Yeah, but it does start. It drops from this point onward. So
yeah, and it drops pretty drastically if you compare the lifespans of before the flood and after. The lifespans drop dramatically in terms of the length. That is, yes, absolutely, that's true. So it's always interesting to see when we're talking about kind of prehistory and how Genesis treats prehistory, because there is a kind of an acknowledgement that we're talking. You can see where we're supposed to be paying attention, that we're now into real history. Like, once you get, by the way, that's not when the problems end. I'm not saying, oh, this solves all the problems. But up until Avraham, you absolutely have this idea. We're talking about prehistory. We're talking in broad strokes. We're not necessarily meant to be taking each thing and sketching out the years, right? We're supposed to be understanding certain things metaphorically. I really do think you see a change once you get to Avraham, where now we're supposed to be taking things very much more seriously. And like, yes, this is how long he lived. These were his kids. These are the number of generations. We're not talking about perfect, we're not talking about just round numbers. We're not supposed to be able to rely on. We're not talking about lifespans. We're not supposed to be able to rely on, or that aren't that important in terms of, or stories that we can say are representing an idea. Once we get to Abraham, it's different, okay? We can see a change in how we, as the audience, as the readers, are supposed to understand these stories, and how these stories are being written. Now, again, that doesn't get us out of the problems, because there are historical problems during the times of Abraham and forward as well. But those are I see those as actual problems, as opposed to anything that's happening before the flood, or even before Abraham, as meant to be taken in a much more kind of is more in the realm of ideas and less in the realm of, I'm going to write what year this happened, right? That's just as an aside. Yes.
To me, this always seemed, the Nephilim always seemed to be acting like Greek mythology.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, right.
And another question you can answer too, is there an implication here that they took these women by force? And is that something that God is getting mad about? It,
Right. So
okay.
let's keep it to, if we look at the actual biblical text, there is no actual, I'm going to share my screen again. If you look at the actual biblical text, there isn't a punishment, okay, unless we see the biblical text, which we can, but then it seems to be blaming people for something that these Bnei Elohim have done, right? If we look at the following, so if you say, okay, Bnei Elohim are actually judges and they are taking women by force, because it absolutely sounds like the women don't necessarily have much choice, right? Because it says that they took they took whichever women they chose, right? It does absolutely sound like the women had no choice, right? And if you want to be less feminist, you could say their families had no choice. It doesn't sound like there was much choice involved on the women's side at all, right? Whoever these Bnei Elohim are, they are simply taking who they want, right? Is that a problem? Is this next verse that God says, now you can absolutely read this next verse that God says, my spirit is not going to be on people forever, as a consequence of the previous verse, that, okay, they did this. And so I'm saying these people are not going to live forever. They're not going to have these ridiculously long lifespans, because that can't happen. Right. But then we hear they had these children who are the men of renown. So it's not super clear that there's, in the biblical text, there is a negative consequence. But of course, we'll see that in Second Temple interpretation, it's very clear that there must be a negative consequence, because this is a bad thing.
Well,
Okay,
it looks
really bad thing. Yes.
It looks like natural to me, like from the natural reading, that because they were big and Nephilim, they're big and strong, so they take wherever they want. The father of the girl can't protect her, the brother can't protect her.
They're not Nephilim. The people who mate with the women are not Nephilim. The Nephilim are, if you read the verse, it says the Nephilim were on earth in those days and also afterwards, that they gave birth to them. It sounds like the Nephilim are the children. Right? Or did I miss something? No, hold on. The Bnei Elohim shows women. Nephilim are the children, or they're simply on earth, right? If you want to be super literal, I'm going to share my screen again.
Okay.
Right. And I am being super literal because you can be super literal with these verses. It's the Bnei Elohim who choose the women. And then in verse 4, it says, Hanephilim hayu ba'aretz b'yamim hahem v'gam acharechem. And the Nephilim were on earth in those days and also afterwards. And then in Bamidbar, we learned that Nephilim are giants. Right. So so let's go into the interpretation, and we're going to continue this in our next class as well. I'm going to, am I sharing my screen? Yes. Okay. So let me take this. There we go. Okay. So I'm in the section of Enoch, which is called the Book of the Watchers. Okay. This is the earliest section, possibly, of the Book of Enoch. It's been dated to, some people date it to even 350 BCE. So certainly 250 BCE. And this is where we see written out the first, what we have of the first interpretation. And it's very clear, even as it's written, that it's drawing from traditions that already exist and even combining. Okay, so let's take a look at the story as it's retold here, and what it's doing with that story. So I'm reading from chapter 6. Everyone can see my screen, right? Okay. All right. So when the sons of men had multiplied in those days, beautiful and comely daughters were born to them. And the watchers, the sons of heaven, saw them and desired them. And they said to one another, come, let us choose for ourselves wives from the daughters of men, and let us beget children for ourselves. Okay. So already we're seeing a different interpretation. The watchers, the sons of heaven, saw them and desired them. And they said to one another, come, let us choose for ourselves wives from the daughters of men, and let us beget children for ourselves. So already you have a purpose here that you didn't really have in the biblical text where they simply see these women are good, whatever that means, and they want them, and or they take them, right? Here they say, let's have kids, let's have children. And Shemichaza, their chief, said to them, I fear that you will not want to do this deed, and I alone shall be guilty of a great sin. Right? They're already kind of getting together and planning this thing. And they all answered him and said, let us all swear an oath. Let's all bind one another with a curse. Then none of us turn back from this counsel until we fulfill it and do this deed. Then they all swore together and bound one another with a curse. And they were all of them 200 who descended in the days of Yared, right? They descended in the days of Yared. Yared go down, right? There are a few kind of linguistic puns here, onto the peak of Mount Hermon, and they called the mountain Hermon because they swore and bound one another with a curse on it. They made a cherem, okay? They made a cherem, so they did it by Hermon. And these are the names of their chiefs. Here we have all the names of all these different angels. Shemichaza was the leader. I'm going to skip over this. The important one is here is Shemichaza. He's the guy who's in charge of this group of angels who want to mate with human women to have children. The deed and its results, these and its results are of course not in the text. This is just a handy subtitle that Nicholsburg has given us. These and all the others with them took for themselves wives from among them, such as they chose. Right? That's from the biblical verse. Took the ones that they chose, and they began to go into them, meaning they had relations with them, and to defile themselves through them, and to teach them sorcery and charms, and to reveal to them the cutting of roots and plants. This already is a different idea, okay? So before, why were they mating with them? They were mating with them because they wanted kids. Now, all of a sudden, there's a tradition about them teaching them magic, and then that's the sin. There are three different stories that are interwoven here. I'm not saying that each one was a complete story on its own. There are three different sins, we could say. One is mating with them for children. The other one is teaching them forbidden knowledge like war and like military things and makeup. We'll get to that in a bit. And the other one is teaching them magic. So these are three different traditions about what the sin was that the angels did with the women. What was it that actually caused the problems? But our main story here is really mating with the women. And they conceived from them and bore to them great giants, right? Here are the Nephilim as giants. And the giants begot Nephilim. Here there are different generations. The giants begot Nephilim because Nephilim, remember, were Bnei Anakim, or the children of giants. Reading that as Nephilim were children of giants, not members of the giant class. The Nephilim were children of giants, and Nephilim were born Eliud. No one's really sure what this word is referring to. And they were growing in accordance with their greatness. They were getting bigger and bigger. They were devouring the labor of all the sons of men, and men were not able to supply them. And the giants began to kill men and to devour them. And they began to sin against the birds and beasts and creeping things and the fish, and to devour one another's flesh. And they drank the blood. Remember that drinking blood is a bad sin, particularly after Noah, frankly. Then the earth brought accusation against the lawless ones. So what's going on in this version of the story? Can anyone hear me, by the way? Because I'm seeing a little bit of a lag. Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. All right. So what seems to be happening here is it starts with the angels. Then they have giants. And the giants devour everything, and they start killing men. And what it sounds like is that they're sinning against all the animals. And it's not clear, are the giants killing men and then men are sinning, or just the giants are sinning? It's very possible here that just the giants are sinning. Okay. And then the earth itself brings accusation against the lawless ones, and that would be, in that case, the giants. Now we're going to get to another problem that the angels are causing. Again, it's clearly a separate story that's being interwoven here. Asael, different angel, right? Asael taught men to make swords of iron and weapons. Oh, so wait, before we move on. So you brought up the Greek mythology. So our next the Asael teaching men certain knowledge, that's kind of like the Prometheus myth, right? But what we've read here actually with the giants that devour everything and start devouring everything that humans have, and then they start eating people, that actually the closest parallel to that, even though people don't talk about it a lot, is something in Ugaritic literature called the birth of the gracious gods. Gracious there being imim with iron, right? So it's Ugaritic, just as Ugaritic is a language that was discovered in when did they discover the site? In 1928, they discovered Ugarit. They excavated in 1929. Ugarit is in Syria. It is a city that had a northwest Semitic language, very close to an earlier version of Hebrew. So it's very interesting as the closest linguistic kind of cousin we have to biblical Hebrew. You learn a lot from it. One of the myths there is called the birth of the gracious God, where the head of the pantheon, El, comes down and mates with two human women, and they give birth to giants. Let me actually stop my share. These women give birth to giants, and the giants start devouring everything. They just eat everything. This is a very close parallel because you have a god mating with human women. The human women give birth to giants, and it's a tremendous issue where the giants just start devouring. However, I wish I could say, oh yeah, this is clearly connected. The problem is that there's such a huge gap in timing where the Ugaritic texts, let's say, are about 1350 BCE, right? We're talking 250 BCE. It's hard to connect the text, but it's probably the closest parallel in terms of story that we have to this kind of story about giants being born from a divine. I'm talking about now the Enoch story, not the Genesis story. The Enoch story, where angels come down, they mate with human women, and they give birth to giants that start devouring everything and causing violence, etc. Now, yes.
It's interesting that the fact that they taught the women magic is like in Pirkei Avot, מרבה נשים, מרבה כשפים. Maybe it's a tradition.
So this is the thing. So they don't. Let's go back to our text. I'm going to share my screen again, and let's look at who learns the magic and who learned. So let's take a look. Right. So yeah. So they it's true. They're teaching women. They're teaching their wives magic, and from the women, right, that's where magic is spreading. So yes, it absolutely does kind of work with this idea that I think was in general in the ancient world that witches are women, right? That women, and there's a whole theory about that, by the way, which is that the idea of women being outside of the official designated methods of divination, right? Women having access to these outside, not quite official things, so there's a whole idea of that. It's not even we read in the idea of women being witches. You don't have to go to Pirkei Avot. You have it in Nahum, right? This idea that of what you do with a witch, right? So that's a whole. I can go into a whole discussion, and there's a whole. I think there's also a whole idea of kind of illicit power with that, which makes this idea of women and magic kind of
I was thinking of Balat Ha'ov of Shaul.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And you see, and there's this idea that women are the ones who does these illicit magical things. It's women, right?
What is in Nahum?
In Nahum, he's talking about Assyria, and he's comparing it with a woman. I'm a witch, that they're like that's going to be their punishment, stripped naked in the public square, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very weird analogy because it doesn't really work. That when the first time I was teaching it, as I was teaching it, I was like, oh, I understand what the parallel is. The parallel is illicit power. These are Assyria, a witch has illicit power. Assyria has illicit power. I think that was the parallel, but you can absolutely argue with me because maybe it was a stretch, but that's what came, like, that's the way I remember it. I have to go back to it and make sure that it still works. I think the second time I looked at it, I was like, okay, it doesn't work quite as well as I remember, but such is life. Anyway, so let's continue. Okay, so Asael does something else. He doesn't teach sorcery. He teaches men to make swords of iron and weapons and shields and breastplates and every instrument of war. He showed them metals of the earth and how they should work gold to fashion it suitably, and concerning silver to fashion it for bracelets and ornaments for women. And he showed them concerning antimony and eye paint and all manner of precious stones and dyes. And the sons of men made them for themselves and for their daughters, and they transgressed and led the holy ones astray. And there was much godlessness on the earth, and they made their ways desolate. Okay, so what's going on here? He teaches them things that we would normally think are crafts. This is not magic. This isn't some kind of secret, but they didn't know. And what are the things that they're learning? They're learning instruments of war. So you have violence, and they're learning things that ornament women. So that kind of encourages lust, right? And it isn't clear. What it sounds like here also is that perhaps what's going on is this is a story. Asael supposedly comes down. It's in this accounting, Asael does not come down first, but maybe in the source, Asael came down first, taught them this knowledge, and then the women, because it says the women they transgressed and led the holy ones astray, right? This is note that this is in the Greek, so you might not always have the sentence because in the Ethiopic it's not there, but the Greek, we actually have Greek of this text, and that's considered earlier, and that does have this verse. And there was much godlessness on the earth, and they made their ways desolate. And now here we go back to Shemichaza teaching spells. Shemichaza taught spells in the cutting of roots. And then we have all these angels teaching signs of the stars, astrology, signs of the earth, signs of the sun. Right? Here's an account of all these angels teaching sorcery, right? So Asael just teaches some crafts, and then we have to go back to these angels teaching sorcery. Now, both Dvorah Dimon early on noticed this, and that, of course, that all these are different accounts kind of woven together. So where you have, again, teaching magic, teaching crafts that lead to sin, and mating with human women. And there are these three strains seem to be drawn together. Okay. What is the result? The intercession of the four archangels. Again, this is the subtitle, not from the text. Then Michael and Sariel and Raphael and Gabriel, Michael, I should say, and Sariel and Raphael and Gabriel looked down from the sanctuary of heaven upon the earth and saw much bloodshed on the earth. This is going back to the giants. All the earth was filled with the godlessness and violence that had befallen it. And entering in, they said to one another, the earth devoid raises the voice of their cries to the gates of heaven, and now to us, the holy ones of heaven, the souls of men make suit, right? Because they're dead, right? Men have been killed, and their souls are saying, bring in our judgment to the Most High, and our destruction before the glory of the majesty, before the Lord of all lords in majesty. And so they go to God, and they say, you see what Asael has done, who has taught all iniquity on the earth. Okay, he's not talking that right now. He's not talking about the giant. So here, so I'm correcting myself. Actually, this and saw much bloodshed on the earth could be actually drawing from the Asael strain of the story, where he taught them war, right? And now they're all killing each other, right? You see what Asael, but also Shemichaza, and whose actions have led to the birth of giants. You see what Asael has done, who has taught all iniquity on the earth and has revealed the eternal mysteries that are in heaven. Now, again, in the eternal mysteries that are in heaven, are we talking about sorcery, or are we talking about those crafts? Okay. And what Shemichaza has done, to whom you gave authority to rule over them who are with him. So you have, on the one hand, the illicit knowledge and sleeping with human women, right? They have gone into the daughters of the men of earth, and they have lain with them and have defiled themselves with women. They have revealed to them all sins and have taught them to make heat-inducing charms. See how everything's being interwoven, okay? So everything's kind of like the teaching them warfare and ornamentation, going in and having relations with them, and teaching them sorcery. And now look, the daughters of men have borne sons from them, giants, half-breeds, and the whole earth is filled with iniquity. And now look, the spirits of the souls of the men who have died make suit, and their groan has come up to the gates of heaven. Okay. So what is the result? The result is that a flood's going to come and destroy everything on earth. All right, and we're going to talk about different versions of the result as well. What's the actual punishment of the watchers? Okay. So then the Most High declared, and the Great Holy One spoke, and he sent Sariel, the son of Lamech, saying, "Go to Noah and say to him in my name, hide yourself, and reveal to him that the end is coming, that the whole earth will perish." Why? Because they've destroyed the earth so much. They've caused so much sin on the earth. There's so much sin now in humans because of what the angels did. We've got to cleanse it with the flood. Okay. But Noah is going to survive. From him a plan will be planted, and his seed will endure for all the generations of eternity. Okay. Now we've got to actually punish the angels. Okay, this is what's going to happen to cleanse the earth of what they've done. Now we've got to punish the angels. What happens? And here again, you're going to see that there's a different accounts, different things are done to different angels. Each one has to get his punishment for what he's responsible for. So Raphael commissioned to imprison Asael. Okay, I keep on reading the subtitles. I should just be reading the verses. To Raphael, he said, "Go, Raphael, and bind Asael hand and foot, cast him into the darkness, and make an opening in the wilderness that is in Dudael. Throw him there, lay beneath him sharp and jagged stones, and cover him with darkness. And let him dwell there for an exceedingly long time. Cover up his face, let him not see the light. And on the day of the great judgment, he'll be led away to the burning conflagration." Remember, we have this idea, they're bound till the end times, okay? So Asael is going to be bound till the end times. We haven't found out about Shemikaza yet and his buddies who had relations with human women. And heal the earth, which the watchers have desolated. Announce the healing of the earth, the plague may be healed. And all the sons of men may not perish because the mystery that the watchers told and taught their sons. All the earth was made desolate by the deeds of the teaching of Asael, and over him, right, all the sins. In other words, like, he's going to be responsible for all their sins. Okay, now Gabriel has a different job. Gabriel has to get rid of the giants. All right, the giants that resulted from the mating of angels with human women. Go, Gabriel, to the bastards. This is very important. The bastards are the mamzerim. Okay. Now I will remind all of you. I don't think I need to remind you guys that much, but it always helps reminding that, of course, in Judaism, bastards are not born out of wedlock. A child born out of wedlock is just a child, right? A mamzer is a child born out of a union that is explicitly forbidden. Okay, so here there is a union that is explicitly forbidden, and the result are bastards, are mamzerim, and this is going to be very important later on because this becomes kind of the code word for these guys who are the result of this union. Okay, to the bastards, the half-breeds, the sons of miscegenation, and destroy the sons of the watchers from among the sons of men. Send them against one another in a war of destruction. Length of days they will not have. No petition will be granted to their fathers in their behalf, that they should expect to live an everlasting life, nor even that each of them should live 500 years. Here we see a relationship to what verse? To the verse, "My spirit shall not dwell on them forever." Okay, not more than 120 years. Here it's changes a little. They shouldn't expect to live an everlasting life, right? Right? My spirit will not dwell in them forever. They won't live 500 years, not over 120. They won't live 500. Okay, kind of fixing it a little bit. And then Shemichaza and those angels, again, these are different stories that are being combined. So Shemichaza and his angels have a slightly different punishment than Asael. Asael just gets bound and is waiting for the end time. Shemichaza wanted to have kids. Shemichaza and his buddies wanted to have kids. So they're going to have to watch their kids die, right? They're going to bind them, right? when their sons perish and they see the destruction of their beloved ones, bind them for 70 generations in the valleys of the earth, right? So they're also going to be bound forever. First, they have to see their kids die, because that is their punishment. What we said in grade school, midah keneged midah, right? Measure for measure. They are getting what they are reaping what they sowed. They wanted children. Now they're going to watch their children die. Okay. And destroy all the spirits of the half-breeds and the sons of the watchers, because they have wronged men, right? And then we have this, remember we talked a little bit about before about how Noah is this kind of messianic character for some reason, and this idea that after the flood, everything is renewed. So here we have a very unusual passage where it's talking about how after these giants are destroyed and the angels are punished, all wickedness is going to be destroyed. Not just wicked people, not just the flood, but wickedness. Destroy all perversity from the face of the earth, and let every wicked deed be gone. Let the plant of righteousness and truth appear, and it will become a blessing. And the deeds of righteousness and truth will be planted forever with joy. And now all the righteous will escape, and they will live until they beget thousands, and all the days of their youth and their old age will be completed in peace. It's describing the Messianic age. It's going straight from this period to the Messianic age. Okay. And it's interesting because it's a little bit hard. You could say, well, is this talking about the end time because they're going to be bound until the end time? So let's go back. It doesn't read that way, right? Because you could say, and everyone who is condemned and destroyed henceforth will be bound together with them until the consummation of their generation, right? Then you say, well, that's till the end time. But then it goes back to destroy all the spirits of the half-breeds and the sons of the watchers, because they have wronged men. That's back to the present, right? Before the flood. And then it's like destroy all perversity from the face of the earth. Remember, there's no subtitle in the text. It goes straight into this. Destroy the giants, and then destroy all perversity from the face of the earth. All of a sudden, we're in the Messianic age, right? Cleanse the earth from all impurity and from all wrong and from all lawlessness and from all sin, and godlessness and all impurities that have come upon the earth remove, and all the sons of men will become righteous, and all the peoples will worship me, and all will bless me and prostrate themselves. In other words, it's going right from what we could have read as the flood, which is cleanse the earth from all impurity, right to the Messianic, but it's the Messianic age. It's everyone's going to be righteous, and all the earth will be cleansed from all defilement and from all uncleanness, and I will not again send upon them any wrath or scourge for all the generations of eternity. It's mixing the results of the flood and the end time. I'll never send wrath on them again, right? There will be no more sin. So it's this kind of very weird melding of the post-Diluvian period, the time after the flood, and the hope for Messianic age. Okay. Again, then I shall open the storehouses of blessing, and then truth and peace will be united together for all the days of eternity, for all the generations of humanity. Okay, so it's going really mixing those two periods. And again, this also connects with this idea of Noah as this messianic figure in a very interesting way. Now, we're already past the hour, so we're going to continue this next time. And in our class next time, we're going to look at yet another interpretation, because in this next section of the book, The Watchers, things are taking kind of a step further, because in the previous passage, the giants are killed, and then that's it. It's over, right? Again, what we saw was that the angels are punished. The angels come down. Asael teaches forbidden crafts. Shemichaza and his buddies take wives and have children. Shemichaza also teaches sorcery, right? And so do his friends. And then all of this causes violence among humanity. So you need to have the flood to clean the violence of humanity, and the giants have to be killed, right? In front of the angels who birthed them, who are their fathers, and then the angels have to be punished. And then we bring in a new age of no sin. End of story. End of story. This is done, right? We're going to see in the next section how it's further, the story is further taken a step further, right, to explain kind of, and it will be taken even further in Jubilees, to explain sin, to explain these demonic entities. Where do demonic entities from Earth come from? They're going to be coming out of this early act of sinfulness by angels. And what we're going to see is that as we move through the Second Temple period, everyone's reacting to this story. In other words, this story is so well known that you either purposely ignore it or you purposely use it, but you know it, right? And what we're going to be talking about is why that is. Why is there such a need for this story? Because again, if we stopped here where we just stopped in Enoch, what are we coming out with? We're coming out with an idea that, this interpretation of the biblical passage. That's what we're coming out with. We have a very strange passage in the Bible. How do we understand this? And the answer is, this is how we understand it. This is what actually happened. Angels came down. They wanted children. They got punished. Other angels came down. They taught tireless of things. They got punished. This led to the flood. What they did in different ways led to the flood, but they were all punished and the giants were killed. Interpretation of Genesis 6 of Breshit Vav, we're done. What we're going to see in the next section of Enoch next week is how this story becomes a much more meaningful story in terms of where sin comes from, where our demonic forces come from, and why you would want to have this explanation, right? When you could have just stopped. You could have just stopped at the interpretation part, right? But there are questions that people are trying to answer, namely, people in this period are very distressed about their own desire to sin. If God, and this is a part of kind of the question of theodicy, which is relatively unique to the Second Temple period, because up until this point, there absolutely are questions about, if God is good and God is all powerful and God knows everything, then why don't I see wicked people suffer? And why do I see good people suffer, right? Why do I see good things happening to bad people and bad things happening to good people? That is absolutely a big question before this period. But in this period, you have the question of, if God created me, it's not even me. If God created man, humans, and God doesn't want humans to sin, then why do humans want to sin? When I was teaching undergraduates, they would say, well, because sinning is fun. And I would say, but why is sinning fun? That was the problem that these people had. They're like, why is sinning? Sinning should not be fun. If God doesn't want me to sin, why in the world do I have a desire to sin? It's not something God wants. And God created humans, so why do humans want to sin? And this is a question that they're trying to answer specifically in this period, whereas it does not seem to be an issue earlier than that. I will remind you that in its original context, the Adam and Eve story is not about the origin of sin at all, right? They sin because they don't obey, right? Adam has no problem. He does have it's a problem, right? But he gets a divine commandment. He gets a divine commandment that he then disobeys, and he gets in trouble. Is that the origin of sin? He already sinned. He sins, and then Cain sins without a connection to Adam's sin at all. People sin, and it's not a theological issue, right? Earlier, at least that we can see earlier than the Second Temple period. But in the Second Temple period, this becomes a big question. Why? Why do people sin? Why do people want to sin? So we're going to be exploring this more next week as we continue with the development of the story within Enoch itself. Any questions or comments?
Two
Yes.
questions in the chat box from Libby and I.
I see. Okay. It seems that humans are the language of cutting of roots and plants is reminiscent of the actions of Acher in the Pardes. Well, I mean, it's not what Achor actually does in the Pardes, right? But here, cutting of roots and plants actually means medicine, right? It's in this context, it's actually medicine is considered some kind of sorcery, which is interesting because later on, medicine is considered something that works against the demons, right? So here, it's not really that. And then you say it seems that humans are going to die in the flood, even though they are not responsible for the evil that the flood is meant to destroy. That's right. So what there seem to be, and there are two different accounts, one where just giants are killed and that has nothing to do with the flood, and the other where the flood, because they're the giants and the giants are killed, right? And then there's the flood, and the flood is the cleansing of the evil that humans are committing because of what angels have sown in their midst. So humans are doing sin. In other words, they're doing more. They're doing probably things compared, one assumes also there's violence connected to lust because they gave women ways to ornament themselves. They're doing it because the angels have contaminated everything, right? And we're going to see this also in other places, that there also is this idea that perhaps it really is almost like contamination, and we see this, I think, more in Jubilees, where there's this idea that the violence is catching from the giants. That kind of starts with the giants and then it kind of catches almost like a disease, right? But the idea is that humans are sinning, and they're sinning because of what the angels have sown, and now we just need to cleanse it because there's no other way. Yes, Cheryl, you have a question?
Are the watchers the Nephilim? The watchers are the divine beings? Who exactly are the watchers in
Oh, that's a good, okay. So in general, when we see the term watchers, it usually is referring to the B'nai Elohim that are in of the original story. There are places where the term watcher is used just for angels. So usually it's specifically, when I say the sin of the watchers, I mean the sin of the B'nai Elohim, right? The as it's interpreted in Second Temple literature. Okay. But there are absolutely Second Temple texts, and you'll see it every now and then where it uses the term watchers, and it doesn't mean them. It just means angels. The same way we say Irin Kadishin, we mean angels, right? Holy angels, right? So there are times when you see the term watchers used just meaning angels, but usually it means those angels. Okay.
Well, for anyone who wants to hear more, there's a very, very good podcast called Understanding Sin and Punishment.
Thank you, Ito. Yes, I have a podcast that goes into all of this, Understanding Sin and Evil. You can get it wherever fine podcasts are available. Yes, I did that podcast based on my book. So it kind of goes through the chapters of my book. You don't have to read my book. You don't have to buy it. You just listen to the podcast. So thank you everyone for joining me, and I will see you next week. Please let me know if you have any comments or questions that you weren't able to ask during the class. And I will, yes. Oh, Cheryl, you have another question.
Is the book on your site, or where is the book?
No,
Where's
the
the
book, I can't put the
Where
book
is
on
the
my
podcast?
Oh, where's the podcast? The podcast, you can if you just look up Understanding Sin and Evil, Miriam Brand, you will find it. I do have a website that has the podcast.
I just found it very easily.
Yes, it's easy to find. So yeah, it's from years ago. You will hear me being very sprightly.
Thanks, Miriam.
Okay, my pleasure. See you next week, everyone.